Alright, so we shall talk about the 100-odd years of forgotten inventions and effects of L.e.n.r, that is low energy nuclear reaction, which is for me cold fusion, simply. Today, L.e.n.r, that is cold fusion, is usually a steady-state, low-temperature electrochemical process, or sometimes low-voltage plasma with low frequency. And it is, or steady-state, it is up to 800 C. This is maybe the Rossi type of solution. Usually deuterium or hydrogen is used. However, contrary to this range of parameters, in the past, that is 100 years ago, very high voltage transient dusty plasma has been used in the range of minimum 30 to 60 kilovolt, and in the repetition frequency was in the kilohertz, megahertz range, and hydrogen, and not deuterium based, hydrogen based. Of course, they never had anything else. And these devices produced electricity, oxygas, that is the mixture of deuterium and hydrogen, and mechanical energy. What was their secret? It was a catalytic surface-based L.e.n.r or cold fusion. That kind of surface-based, powder-based cold fusion had a better economy. And it is quite strange that until 1914, that is just right before the First World War, transmutation was absolutely mainstream. Coley, Patterson, G.G. Thomson, and so on, some 20 people did work on this subject, mostly British, interesting, mostly British. No French, no German involvement. However, there was an oddball, Russian, independently working from the rest of the crowd. His name was Mitkevich, and he discovered that when interrupted arc was used in the experiment, the voltage reversed. That is, the interrupted arc started to work as a generator, not as a passive device that is generating electricity. That was quite a strange discovery. And let me show you some of the devices which I have found from the British investigators. They usually used 250 kilovolts and maybe 100 hertz frequency, because they used mechanical interrupters and so-called inductive coils in order to produce these high voltages. Different tube configuration have been used. However, you see here that they used double wall discharge tubes, and it had the advantage that not much outside gas could penetrate into the discharge tube. Yet, and this is strange, they discovered that from ordinary hydrogen, helium was formed. That is, it's a real sign of transmutation, and sometimes neon. And in the papers, they note that this phenomena is not reliable, but the best results were with palladium. And there were not so good results with other material. However, at the very beginning, let's say the first 1,000 discharges, no transmutation is observed. So they didn't realize that the surface of the electrodes must be changed, roughened, in order to start this effect. But given them 10 more years, in my opinion, they would have figured out that it is necessary. The roughened surface, that is large surface, which is the most easy to achieve with dust, of course. So, now as the, yes. This is the experimental arrangement of Mickiewicz. It is very simple. Here you see the arc discharge with 110 volts of battery, but he made a very thorough investigation. He used not only different diameter carbon electrodes, but copper, aluminum, iron, and mercury as well. And he figured out that with mercury, there is no effect whatsoever, simply because in mercury you don't have powder at all. And whenever only one electrode has been mercury, yet the other is, let's say, aluminum, copper, he got effects only, this voltage reversal effects, when the other was carbon, that is graphite. Because carbon or graphite is the ideal material to make dust, fine dust. All the rest of the materials like aluminum, iron, is just not making that amount of dust. Unfortunately, due to the first Russian Revolution, his work stopped. And at that time, there was not only the problem what makes the reversal or the reverse kick of the voltage in an interrupted arc discharge, but simply they didn't understand at all what is arc discharge or what is discharge at all. So this kind of discovery, in my opinion, came 10 to 20 years earlier, before the basic mechanism of the discharges was understood and interpreted. Okay, let's see next. Now, let me show you the inventions which I've found, which are based on the previous effects, which were unfortunately forgotten simply because the First World War broke out, and the researchers either went to the Western Front or got a military research job. So actually this kind of high voltage transient transmutations were forgotten. They were so forgotten that not even a footnote ever appeared in any books on arc discharges, or nobody ever referred to this set of very important and potentially influential test, which is an absolute tragedy of the First World War. For example, Soddy, who was the real brain behind Ernst Rutherford's work, was shot down in Gallipoli at the age of 27. So several bright, intelligent physicists were just shot in the trenches of the First World War. And this is the reason we are suffering here, that always somebody by accident discovers this effect. The first one, in my opinion, was Tesla. I shall talk about him later. But I noted with a circle those cases when they thought that they were tapping the energy of the physical vacuum, because they realized this effect appears only in case of transients, never for steady state DC plasma, never. You had to excite it with a high frequency. Their conclusion, the energy is coming from ether, which might be true, but not in this case. So Tesla demonstrated his full electric car in 1931 in the summer of June in Buffalo, New York. And as an urban legend, this demonstration was not completely forgotten. Tesla turned a Pierce Arrow, then it was a luxury car. He threw away the internal combustion engine and put the electrical motor and his high voltage discharge devices. He never patented it, never, but he talked extensively in his lectures and interviews about transmutation and high voltage and discharge tubes. And we are quite familiar that he was working with carbon button lamps, and there he explicitly stated that these carbon button lamps, which were not developed commercially, are so shiny that it is impossible that that amount of input electrical energy is enough to make such an amount of bright radiation. So he realized that something fishy is here. And in secret, he moved on to make electricity. In my patent application, I broadly outlined what might have been his invention. Of course, the background is his single wire technology, when he transmitted very high frequency, very high voltage electricity via a single wire. It is a useless technology except plasma physics, except for this case. For this case, to create high voltage, high frequency, the single wire technology is by far the superior. But by now, completely forgotten. Nobody is ever using it, to say less that it is never thought. Quite the opposite. We are taught at school that the electricity must come in a closed circuit. It's not true. You can use a single wire to transmit high frequency electricity. Of course, it has an electrosmog, quite severe, but it is possible. So it's a pity that it has been forgotten. So the Elon Musk's Tesla car was actually named due to this urban legend that there was a real electric car in the 30s, which did not require gasoline at all. So this urban legend kept on, and this might have led to the Tesla car. The second guy who discovered in the 1908, just at the end of First World War, Henry Morey, a young radio amateur at Salt Lake City, and it produced also electricity. And then after I shall talk about all other absolutely unrelated inventions. All these guys stumbled into this phenomena independently and by accident. Of course, not by reading textbooks. I shall come back later to this. Henry Morey was actually building a crystal radio or detector radio, which is a very simple circuit, and it used to be very familiar until the 50s. Now it's nobody, no teenagers are building crystal radios because simply long wave radios, AM radios, no longer in existence. But in my opinion, he replaced here, which is the earphone, which is in fact an inductivity, high voltage corona discharge tubes. And he had an extreme advantage, that is, in Salt Lake City, the air was always very dry. So he had, his antenna was an ideal source of very high voltage, low current power supply, which nowhere else in the world exists. Maybe in the Death Valley or in the Sahara, but in the Sahara, nobody fooled around with crystal radios. So with just this lucky movement, he realized that in his earphone there was a very loud continuous cracking where there was no radio station. So he realized that energy is coming out from an unknown source. This was his first lucky observations out of sheer luck. And he never told, later never disclosed what was it. 40 years later, I think I have solved this riddle. What was the main initial idea for him? But actually, this kind of periodic power source of high voltage from the antenna was producing via coronary discharge and trichal pulses up to 100 kilohertz frequency for coronary discharge. This was his lucky start, and he might have used in his initial tube 1 or 2 drops of water, and that's enough. So his second invention, because of course the PIN diode has limited capability of current, he discovered the first transistor, germanium-based. This is the drawing. This guy had an extreme gift. He had an open channel from above. I just cannot explain why otherwise. Discovering the secret of this early cold fusion and producing actually electricity, discovered the first semiconducting transistor device, and he built radios with the help, without amplifier tubes, and patented later a device which was able to kill cancer cells. And none of these inventions survived. He kept the secret for him. Now, in his only patent, he smuggled in his power-producing tubes, very interesting, high surface area tubes, which would, I mean, the details would worth at least 1 hour of discussion, but we don't have time for that. This is the single wire power supply, which he used for several of his experiments, which is unknown today. And he patented actually 2 quite different power tubes. One of them was actually to make high frequency, high voltage pulses, and the other, most probably this was the power tube which produced the excess energy by producing oscillating dusty plasma. And the charged clusters of oscillating dust actually always delivered a certain amount of electricity to the anodes, and thus he was able to collect directly electricity, not heat. And in my opinion, this is far superior than heat. So whenever you are producing heat, there is a chance that one can produce electricity also, but requires far more sophisticated wiring. Okay, let's see the next. with the table, and the next invention will be from the 50s by G.B. Coleman, and his invention produced electricity. I don't know anything about this guy, nothing. I have no idea who he was, how come that he discovered this effect. He patented it as a battery, which is never exhausted, never. And again, a very strange form of dusty plasma, what we shall see here. It might be not detailed enough, and there are 3 figures, but he used this discharge tube here, which was filled with powder and with different layers, and of course he had water in the crystalline form. So it was there. And it is a part of a high-frequency oscillating circuit, and even an outer magnetic field, which I'm not sure whether it is possible or necessary, but he used it, and the transverse magnetic field. Very unusual, and to the best of my knowledge, nobody has ever even attempted to do it. Just by reading the patent, you are just unable to repeat this experiment. So many important parameters are missing. So, I mean, repeating his experiments requires, in my opinion, 5 years of patience, at least. All right. Now, after Coleman, a fellow Hungarian, Joseph Pop, comes who invented an inert gas motor, which apart from inert gas used water also as a fuel. This is the drawings of his first patent, actually. Bob, shall we stop, because the 20 minutes is most probably over. Okay. It was a single-stroke engine. This invention was actually intended as a gun, just one huge explosion with the help of water and inert gases. But the asymmetric arrangement of the electrodes is quite visible. He just arranged an extremely highly intensive electric field, a pulse, and some water, inert gases, and of course some dust has been always created at each impulse. I have seen some blurred video about this experiment blowing apart a gun. Now, these are actually drawings from his second patents, where you can see sharp electrodes. So actually, he discovered the shoulders effect before shoulders. And instead of a single explosion, he used this effect for the so-called internal combustion engine. Actually, he hacked several internal combustion engines. Cylinders were closed, no input, no output of gases, nothing. But it has been seen running for several of these changed or hacked motors. This is his first Leyland engine, 4-cylinder as far as I know. This is the same motor from a different angle. You can see the cylinders here. Now this is the head of the cylinder. You can see here the sharp electrodes. Later he used 2 pairs of electrodes. This is very similar to your arrangement actually, but basically it's the same. He doesn't use in this arrangement acoustic or resonant chamber, but in his third patent he already used the resonant acoustic chambers with the 2 electrodes. So we are roughly there. This is the asshole pup. He was absolutely paranoid. Absolutely.
Slightly louder.
So?
Slightly louder.
Slightly louder. Unfortunately, this is my loudest. So quite sophisticated and complicated, and in my opinion, this is not the right approach. But anyway, he used, instead of thermal energy, as a series of explosion, internal combustion engine, that is mechanics. Quite strange that even today there are some people who would like to repeat his experiments. Some of his engines are still intact, but he never passed on the secret of the inert gas mixture. This is his lab, and he made his inert gas mixture in this glove box. Another mixing unit, quite sophisticated, and in my opinion, overcomplicated. This is the two-cylinder engine. Here you see the 2 cylinders. He built several engines. And this is the electrical board of this engine with the timing when the spark will commence, how long does it will take place. Actually, on the first demonstration, Richard Feynman, the physicist of California Institute of Technology, was there, and he thought that this must be a hoax. He started to fiddle around with the electricity, and the engine exploded and killed 1 spectator and seriously wounded 2 others. So Caltech had to pay a heavy compensation. But Feynman, who really participated in Manhattan Project, was absolutely jealous and proud, and he thought that this guy speaking in a foreign accent has no idea about nuclear physics, and only he, Richard Feynman, is capable of judging what is working and what is not. So actually, until the very end of his life, he maintained that this must have been a hoax. So had Feynman is not so stupid and Pop is not so jealous, this could have kicked off in 1968 cold fusion in another form. But both parties were just jealous, overproud, and stupid. Okay, the next one is again a Hungarian whom I happen to know personally, János Jekkel, who invented an oxy-gas car. And this is just my drawing. Uncle Joe, as I called him, at home made a welding device, very simple, which I told you in the office. Very thin silver wires acted as electrodes, very high voltage, 20 kilowatt voltages, one-sided pulses at 10 kilohertz were used. And he claimed, which I doubt, that he was even able to separate hydrogen from oxygen. I'm not sure whether is it true or not, but he wanted to make at home a moonshine oxy-gas welding machine, and he realized that 500 watts of electricity gave him 2, 3, or 4 kilowatts of thermal energy from the welding machine. This was the original discovery which led him actually to the development of a oxy-gas car, a Moskvich 407, and which he used actually, drove several hundreds of kilometers with a small amount of water. And these were the tubes which we built according to his instruction. And here was a gauge, a temperature gauge. And actually, this is his biggest mistake, because he never knew what makes this phenomena tick. So he had no grasp what is important, what is not. So when we had the opportunity to rebuild his machine, he suggested us to use this kind of perforated stainless steel electrodes instead of the high surface area, thin silver wires electrodes. And therefore, we never had really the chance of success. But I have learned it 5 years later when he told, no, his original electrodes were not these flat plate and stainless steel stuff, but very thin silver wires. But then it was too late. This is from a close quarter, the electrode, which never worked. We just threw away the effect due to this. Again, another view of the tube. We used to work for half a year without any single result on this subject. It was absolutely maddeningly frustrating experience. Now I shall talk about two other guys, Czernetsky and Correa, together, who both of them thought that they discovered how to tap the energy of fluctuating vacuum. Alexander Czernetsky, a Russian professional, highly skilled plasma physicist, with the help of Nobel laureate Russian hydrogen bomb maker, I forgot his name, but it will come to my mind. They teamed together and they figured out that excess energy from hydrogen plasma, from oscillating hydrogen plasma, is certainly coming from ether or the physical vacuum. This is his experimental tube. Here you see a pellet of titanium hydride, where the hydrogen is stored, and it is heated from the outside. So depending on the heat, the hydrogen pressure inside this tube can be regulated. So he used, like you, titanium hydride. And very simple arc discharge tube. But it was part of an oscillating circuit. So this is again a very similar oscillating circuit, connected, coupled oscillating circuit, what Moray used. And this guy discovered it independently of Moray. This was our test device. And we really found that sometimes in the interrupted arc discharge, self-generating oscillations appear, very powerful oscillations. I was the head of the team, of a 10-member team, whom we tried to replicate these experiments. Both the current and the voltage were of very high amplitude oscillations, but the most telltale is that both current and voltage reversed. So in this quarter, actually, it's quite apparent, visible, that the tube behaved as a generator. It was generating electricity.
What is this again? Repeat.
These are the voltage and the current. This is the current, this is the voltage, this is the zero at the very middle. So when the electricity is reversing and the voltage is reversing, we are in this quarter. And in this quarter, electrical energy is not dissipated like in an ordinary discharge, but electricity is generated, which is absolutely off the textbook physics. And this is, in my opinion, the easiest area of experimental investigation. And this is what Mitkevich, the Russian Mitkevich, discovered about 100 years before. But it hasn't been followed, unfortunately. But this effect really does exist. This third figure is again that we have filtered out local oscillations. So it's more easy to see that the discharge tube is producing electric energy. And now I shall show you some other tubes by Alexandre and Paulo Correa. They are Canadians but Portuguese born. They used high surface area discharge tubes of pulsed glow discharge. You said that you are using also pulsed glow discharge, but of a different. Then it is either glow discharge, arc discharge, or corona discharge. There are no more.
So the corona transferring over to glow.
This is the same stuff they used. They applied and received 3 or 4 patents. It is in the public domain now. They gave up after 20 years. They couldn't get financed. Simply because I think they found the wrong technical environment, because their tubes were literally ruined after half an hour simply due to surface erosion. So it did produce the dusty plasma, this tube. However, the amount of dust was so immense that the tube became electrically conductive simply because the dust settled on the glass walls and became conducting electrically, and then it became useless. But the phenomena they discovered quite independently from Chernetsky. The phenomena is true. Actually, Correa discovered this reverse voltage effect, the energy generating effect, while cleaning the surface of an aluminum plate. So he was also like you, a surface cleaner. This is one of our test device, the test pad, and on color you can see some of the tubes. And on this tube, though barely visible, there are hundreds of little tips. I wanted a marriage between the Correa effect and the shoulders effect. And I expected here an effect. I gave it this tube to my engineers to test it, and he lied to me. He lied that there is no effect whatsoever. And for 10 years, therefore, our line of research just went astray. We did practically useless work, simply because we couldn't get the fundamentals well. Again, brand new large surface area KELEA tubes, a KELEA test end. You see the condensers, batteries, and this is the test tube itself. This is the same test stand from another angle. One can see different electrodes, different test tubes. This is mountable, so one can take it apart. These are permanent. But as I told you, in a half an hour, the dust settles on the surface of the glass, and it was just a nightmare. It was useless. These are already the low surface area Chernetsky tubes with external magnets also. The external magnet never gave us any better results. These are the surface protrusions, sometimes quite sharp pins resulted, which is absolutely unusual, cannot be explained on textbook electricity, because all of them showed a sign of vorticity, which shouldn't be there, actually.
Because of the arc.
Arc. Transient, and only transient arc does it. Steady state arc doesn't do it. This is a quite different story. It leads to biology and paranormal phenomena, but it's a different story. I don't want to talk now. This is another crater which KELEA investigated and knew that it is absolutely necessary in order to have this excess energy effect. So this roughened surface. All right, now we shall get to the last invention of Edwin Gray, who was again a loner, died under suspicious circumstances. Oh yes, I forgot. These are some of the test results by KELEA. You see here the reverse of voltage, sometimes minus 250 volts. And this is his circuit. This part of the circuit is capturing the excess electric impulses.
If you mean the reversal of voltage or generated voltage?
Generated voltage. So he gets more generated excess voltage. And when only a couple of pulses are done, these oscillations do not take place, or very few. After some minutes, there are more oscillations, and after, let's say, some additional time, there are quite heavy oscillations. So the surface must be rough. Oscillating charges and pseudo charges must be necessary, in my opinion, to help neutron formation. These are, as you see, very significant oscillation both in voltage and current. These are necessary in order to this oscillation to produce excess energy and capture it with the help of an oscillating circuit. Here you see one oscillation which carried some 1.5 kilowatt power, excess power. Okay, here we are. This is the US patent of Gray. It has kind of two inventions in one. Of course, the Chernetsky spark gap or interrupted arc discharge. And here he uses very fine mesh resembling Henry Moray, large surface area discharges. And he's using in his patent, as he described, of course, transient, very high voltage inductive pulses, electrical pulses created by inductivity. All right, that is the end of presentation. So actually what we see here, what we saw here, that these effects were always discovered by accident and always with the help of transient dusty plasma discharges. It's a must. But it is surprising how many different discoveries were made and then completely forgotten. Society is just, I mean science as a society is just not sensitive to this huge area.